When you hear the name the $1 Million Man, you know exactly who we're talking about. The custom suits, the fistfuls of cash, that unforgettable, condescending laugh. He was, without a doubt, one of the greatest villains in wrestling history. But this isn't just a story about that guy. This is the story of the man he was before the money and the fame. When he was just a young wrestler trying to carve out a name for himself in the gritty, smoke-filled arenas of Houston, Texas. This is the story of how a legendary promoter and a future creative genius handed Ted DiBiase the very blueprint that would build a millionaire. So, how exactly did Houston wrestling create the $1 Million Man? To answer that, we've got to go way back. Long before the slick global machine of modern wrestling, the industry was a patchwork of territories. Each region was a kingdom ruled by a local promoter, and together they formed the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA. To be a true champion, you had to travel the circuit, from Florida to the Carolinas, from St. Louis to Texas. And in Texas, one city was the crown jewel, a proving ground for anyone with serious ambition. Houston. On Friday nights, fans from all walks of life packed the legendary Sam Houston Coliseum. This wasn't a polished, family-friendly venue. It was a cauldron of pure, raw emotion. The air hung thick with the smell of stale beer, popcorn, and cigars, a haze of blue smoke hovering over the ring. This was a place for grown-ups, where the line between hero and villain was drawn in bright, bold letters. The crowds were loud, passionate, and dangerously close to the action. They weren't just watching the show, they were the show. In this era, you didn't get famous with a viral clip. You earned your reputation one town, one match at a time, driving hundreds of miles on dark highways for a modest payday. You learned your craft in rundown gyms and in the unforgiving laboratory of the ring itself. The territory system was a trial by fire that forged legends. Superstars like Harley Race, Ric Flair, the Von Erichs, and a young Hulk Hogan all came through Houston, knowing that if you could make it there, you were one step closer to conquering the world. Into this pressure cooker stepped a young man with a famous last name and a lot to prove. He was talented, athletic, and had wrestling in his blood. But in the dog-eat-dog world of the territories, that wasn't nearly enough. He needed an education. He needed to learn the real art of pro wrestling, the art of making people believe. His name was Ted DiBiase, and his university was about to be Houston Wrestling. At the center of this empire of sweat and spectacle was one man, Paul Boesch. And calling him just a promoter is a massive understatement. He was the patriarch and moral compass of Houston wrestling, a man who commanded a level of respect that bordered on reverence. That respect was earned not just in arenas, but on the battlefields of World War II. Boesch was a decorated war hero who had survived the Hurtgen Forest, returning with silver and bronze stars. That experience gave him an unshakable integrity that was incredibly rare in the carnival world of pro wrestling. While some promoters were known for cheating their talent, Boesch was known as a man of his word. Wrestlers knew that if they put their bodies on the line for him, they'd be paid fairly. He was known as maybe the single best payoff man in the wrestling business. But it wasn't just about the money. Boesch knew the real payoff was the story. It was the climax of a feud, the moment the hated villain finally got what was coming to him. Boesch was a master at building that anticipation, whipping the crowd into a frenzy so that when the final bell rang, the release of emotion felt like an explosion. He ran his golf athletic club with an iron will but a fair hand. His office was a mandatory stop for the biggest names in the NWA. He had an almost psychic sense of what the Houston audience wanted, which hero they'd love and which villain they'd despise. He built a relationship with his city that lasted for decades, keeping his wrestling show on local TV from 1949 all the way until 1987, a practically unheard of run. His reputation made Houston a destination, A run in Boesch's territory wasn't just a job, it was a graduate course in wrestling psychology. Theodore Marvin DiBiase was wrestling royalty, even if it didn't always feel that way. He was the son of Iron Mike DiBiase, a tough-as-nails brawler. But tragedy struck when Ted was just 15, watching his father suffer a fatal heart attack right in the middle of a match. After his mother fell into depression and alcoholism, Ted was sent to live with his grandparents. Despite that shadow, the call of the squared circle was too strong. After a promising college football career at West Texas State, alongside future wrestling stars Tully Blanchard and Tito Santana, an injury helped shift his focus. The path forward seemed clear. Following in his father's footsteps, he was trained by the legendary Funk brothers, Dory Jr. and Terry. He started his career as a referee in 1974 before making his wrestling debut in 1975. The young Ted DiBiase was a natural. He was athletic, handsome, and technically skilled beyond his years. He toured the territories, having major runs in Bill Watts' Mid-South Wrestling, but also becoming a star across the NWA and in Japan. He was a babyface, a good guy, and he was successful, even capturing the prestigious Mid-South North American Championship multiple times. He was a solid, reliable, second-generation kid with a bright future. But something was missing. Being the good guy just felt incomplete. There's a ceiling for a polite, technically sound wrestler. In pro wrestling, it's the villains, the heels, who drive the business. A hero is only as good as the villain he's fighting. DiBiase had all the tools, but he hadn't found the right way to use them yet. When he arrived in Houston, he was still that talented good guy, but Paul Boesch likely saw what DiBiase himself was starting to feel. His true calling, his path to real superstardom, was on the dark side. Working for Paul Boesch was an education in generating heat. Heat is the lifeblood of a villain. It's not just getting booed, it's making the audience genuinely, truly despise you. It's making them so desperate to see you get beaten that they'll happily pay for a ticket. This was Boesch's specialty. This was the payoff philosophy. For Ted DiBiase, this meant unlearning his good guy instincts. No more playing to the crowd for cheers. Now it was all about the sneer, the cheap shot when the ref's back was turned, the constant complaining, and carrying himself with an air of arrogant superiority. DiBiase had a natural gift for it. His smooth, believable in-ring style made his moments of cowardice and cheating even more infuriating for the audience. In the pressure cooker of the Sam Houston Coliseum, these lessons were put into practice. The booking philosophy was simple. Build heat week after week. The heel would get the upper hand through cheating, leaving fans frustrated. The next week, the hero would vow revenge, only for the heel to escape again, maybe by getting himself disqualified on purpose. This slow burn would build for weeks, sometimes months, until the tension was unbearable. Then, and only then, would Boesch deliver the payoff. It would be a huge match with a special rule, a steel cage or a Texas bull rope match where the villain had nowhere to run. When the hero finally won, the roar from the Houston crowd wasn't just a cheer, it was a cathartic release. Boesch wasn't selling wrestling, he was selling emotional satisfaction. And he taught Ted DiBiase how to be the perfect catalyst for that transaction. The lessons about timing, psychology, and how a well-placed sneer was more powerful than any move were being etched into DiBiase's DNA. While DiBiase was learning from the master, another, much younger mind was also taking notes. His name was Bruce Prichard, and his story is one of a kind. Prichard's wrestling education started as a kid, right there in Boesch's territory. As a young boy, he started working for Houston Wrestling selling posters. While other kids played with action figures, Bruce was in the middle of the action. He wasn't just a fan, he was an insider with a front row seat to the genius of Paul Boesch. He'd listen in on meetings, soak up conversations in the locker room, and absorb every facet of the business. His rise was incredible. Before he was even out of his teens, he was involved in television production and was even doing ring announcing. He was a prodigy, a sponge who understood wrestling psychology on an instinctual level. This boy genius, who grew up in the Sam Houston Coliseum, struck up a friendship with the up-and-coming Ted DiBiase. It was an unlikely pair, the seasoned second-generation wrestler and the kid who learned the business at the promoter's feet. But there was mutual respect. DiBiase saw Prichard's sharp mind, and Prichard saw in DiBiase the perfect vessel for a truly iconic heel character. DiBiase himself has credited Bruce Prichard with giving him a significant break. While Boesch provided the platform and the philosophy, Prichard was the on-the-ground collaborator, a creative sounding board who helped sharpen the nuances of DiBiase's emerging persona. That relationship, forged in the Houston territory, would end up being one of the most important in both of their careers. The collaboration between DiBiase and Prichard in Houston was a meeting of two brilliant wrestling minds. Prichard, who had watched every great heel come through the territory for years, could deconstruct what worked. He could point out how Ric Flair used his robes and arrogant strut to project wealth, or how another villain used a gimmick to infuriate the audience. It was in Houston that DiBiase perfected the art of being the hated antagonist. He wasn't a monster or a wild brawler. He was something much more infuriating. He was the guy who thought he was better than you. He was condescending, arrogant, and looked down on the blue-collar fans who paid to see him. Every sneer at the crowd, every time he outsmarted a beloved hero, was a dress rehearsal for a much bigger stage. Prichard's role, especially with his TV production experience, was key. He helped DiBiase figure out how to translate that in-ring character to the screen during interviews, or promos. It was here that the blueprint for the $1 Million Man really started coming together. The cadence, the condescending tone, the absolute belief in his own superiority, all of it was refined in the Houston Wrestling TV studio. DiBiase said Prichard gave him a break, and that break was the chance to fully develop this specific kind of villain. Boesch created the environment, but Prichard was the catalyst who helped DiBiase unlock his true potential. By the mid-1980s, the wrestling world was changing. The old territory system that Paul Boesch had mastered was crumbling. Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation were expanding aggressively, armed with national television and a larger-than-life superhero in Hulk Hogan. The writing was on the wall. The business was going national. For a wrestler like Ted DiBiase, it was a time of uncertainty, but also huge opportunity. He had paid his dues. He had honed his craft all over the world and was arguably one of the best all-around performers anywhere. He'd been a top babyface in Bill Watts' popular Universal Wrestling Federation, but he was a big fish in a pond that was quickly evaporating. Then, the call came from Vince McMahon. McMahon wasn't just looking for wrestlers, he was looking for characters. He had his ultimate hero, his giant, and his patriot. Now, he needed villains. He made DiBiase an offer to jump to the WWF, the promotion many old-school guys saw as the enemy. But DiBiase was a smart businessman. He saw where the industry was headed. The future wasn't in the Sam Houston Coliseum anymore. It was in Madison Square Garden. He returned to the WWF in 1987, and Vince McMahon had a very specific, very powerful idea waiting for him. In a now famous meeting, Vince McMahon told DiBiase, "Ted, I have an idea that's never been done. I'm looking for a guy that's articulate, that interviews well, that's a great wrestler, and you fit the bill." The concept? A fabulously wealthy, arrogant villain who believed everyone and everything could be bought. A man who used his fortune to humiliate people. As Pat Patterson, McMahon's right-hand man, later told DiBiase, "Ted, if Vince could be a character in his own show, this is who he would be." This was the role DiBiase's entire career had been building towards. Every lesson from Houston was about to pay off. The character's psychology was pure Paul Boesch. Find a universal human emotion, in this case, hatred for a rich bully, and exploit it for maximum heat. The character's detailed persona was a masterclass in the lessons he refined with Bruce Prichard. The custom suits, the sneer, the condescending promos, it was everything they had workshopped, now amplified on a global stage. The signature evil laugh? That was an exaggerated version of DiBiase's own. The WWF spared no expense. DiBiase flew first class, had limos, and was given wads of flash cash to throw around. The famous vignettes began to air, showing DiBiase bribing his way through life and humiliating ordinary people. And, as DiBiase himself has recalled, producing some of those iconic early vignettes was his old friend from Houston, Bruce Prichard. The connection even continued on screen when Prichard, as his brother love character, would praise his benefactor, Ted DiBiase, on his talk show. The Houston connection had come full circle. When DiBiase couldn't win the WWF Championship, he simply created his own, the solid gold, diamond-encrusted $1 million championship. It was the ultimate expression of the payoff philosophy. Everything about the $1 Million Man was a direct application of the lessons learned years earlier in Texas. He was the perfect villain because he had received the perfect education. When you look back at the career of the $1 Million Man, it's easy to get lost in the sparkle of the WWF persona. The cash, the diamonds, that laugh, it's all unforgettable. But the foundation of that character wasn't built in a New York boardroom. It was laid on the concrete floor of the Sam Houston Coliseum. It was there, under the legendary Paul Boesch, that DiBiase learned the art of the payoff, that the real money was in making thousands of people pay to see you lose. And it was there he found an unlikely creative partner in a teenage Bruce Prichard, who helped him sharpen the arrogant persona that would define his career. Vince McMahon may have had the idea for the $1 Million Man, but Ted DiBiase was the only person who could have pulled it off. When Vince laid out the vision, DiBiase just had to access the toolkit he'd spent years building in the territories. The lessons from Boesch and the insights from Prichard gave him the psychology and the credibility to turn a great gimmick into a legendary character. The $1 Million Man wasn't created in the WWF, he was forged in Houston. What do you think? Was Ted DiBiase the greatest villain in wrestling history? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into wrestling history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.